Hello, everybody. Welcome to the latest edition of the Post with BP. I'm your host, Billy Parvatam. Folks, I'm so excited today to be joined by Luke Hallett. Luke is a seasoned producer at Learfield and also a play-by-play man for High Point University. He's a proud alumni of Indiana University, and we both overlapped in the Northwoods League, believe it or not, 6 years ago, the summer of 2018, when I was the voice of the lacrosse loggers in Wisconsin, and Luke was the voice of the Mankato Moondogs in Mankato, Minnesota. Luke, so glad to see you again and reconnect after a long time.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's great to be back. A lot of good times in the Northwoods League, Mankato, lacrosse, you name it. A lot of good places.
Yeah, for sure. And we'll have a chance later in the podcast to reminisce about that time in the Northwoods League. Well, let's get right to it, Luke. We are about 10 days from Super Bowl 56 between the Chiefs and the 49ers. As you actually, I should say Super Bowl 57. You can never tell with the Roman numerals; they're always
Mhm.
confusing. I always need the numbers, but Super Bowl 57 between the Chiefs and the 49ers seems to be an exciting Super Bowl. But before we get to that, I wanted to recap a championship Sunday. The Chiefs defeated the Ravens 17-10, and the 49ers defeated the Lions 34-31. They were down 24-7 at one point in that game, and made an incredible comeback. Let's talk about Chiefs and Ravens first, Luke. And for the record, I want to say I'm a DC sports guy first, but Lamar
Okay.
Jackson is my favorite athlete. So I'm also a Ravens fan. If you're allowed to have two teams, I know that's a debated topic between some of my friends, but so I'm obviously very sad the Ravens lost. They had a great season, but what were your overall takeaways from the game? I mean, the Chiefs scored all 17 points in the first half, and the Ravens defense, give them a lot of credit. They shut out Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce in the second half, but just the offense with Lamar couldn't keep it going. And the Ravens surprisingly abandoned the run despite leading the league in rush attempts and yards. They did not rush on second down the entire game. So a lot of things played into that game. But yeah, Chiefs, Ravens. Luke, what are your thoughts on that game?
I think it was one of Baltimore's, unfortunately, given the timing, worst performances of the year. I mean, you go in and, like you mentioned, no rushes on second down. It felt like they didn't utilize Gus Edwards all that much. His first rush, I think, was 15 yards or so. He goes after that, and they're really stingy giving him the football. I think maybe that's a game changer down the stretch as well. But it felt like a lot was left on the table for the Ravens. They throw that pick in the end zone, triple coverage. You have Zay Flowers reaching out, trying to score that touchdown, and he just can't do it. And I think those are the things that change the outcome of the game. I mean, you're leaving a bunch on the table, and that's what it comes down to if you're a Baltimore fan. Now, if you're Kansas City, you point to your first half effort and you say, okay, we executed, we did what we needed to do. The defense held up its end of the bargain in the second half. Now, how do you feel going into the Super Bowl? Maybe you feel okay, maybe you don't. But it was a game, for at least my perspective, where the Ravens left a lot on the table, and I think it cost them.
Yeah, Luke, and I think for me, it's just look. I mean, look, the Ravens were clearly the best team in the regular season all year. You know, they were able to beat the Texans in the divisional round to make the championship game. But I just felt like this was the year. Now, it doesn't mean that the Ravens can't win in future years, that Lamar can't lead them to a victory. But you think about it. Joe Burrow, got hurt at some point in the season. Deshaun Watson got hurt in the division. The Steelers haven't had the stellar quarterback play. Even then, it was a tough division, but you feel like you caught some breaks there. And for the rest of the league, you thought, man, this is a down year for Mahomes and the Chiefs. They lead the league in receiver drops. It seems like they're not all there as a team after deep runs can fatigue a team after a couple years. But unfortunately, it seems like Mahomes is kind of like MJ was back in the '90s. He prevented all these great players from winning a championship. So that's where I wanted to go with this question. Obviously, like I mentioned, Lamar Jackson is my not only favorite NFL player, my favorite athlete in sports right now. Do you think Lamar will ever win a Super Bowl? I mean, again, a lot of different factors. You talk about how stacked the AFC is. You got all these great young quarterbacks: Justin Herbert, Joe Burrow, Trevor Lawrence, uh, Patrick Mahomes, of course, Josh Allen. CJ Stroud is coming on. We saw him, do some great things this season. Uh, obviously you got to throw Lamar Jackson in the mix, but you talk about a stacked AFC. You don't know if you're going to catch the breaks like you did this past season. But what do you think? Do you think Lamar Jackson and his style of play can lead Baltimore to the promised land?
It's a tough question. I mean, like you mentioned, there's so many good quarterbacks and good teams in the conference, and I think that's the biggest thing. I think if they get to the big game, you play in the Super Bowl, you have to like your chances because it's a battle-tested road. You're not getting there easy. You got to earn your trip in that AFC conference. I don't know. I think he is capable of doing so, but it's going to require him to put together a full 60 minutes of football in the clutch. I mean, it just comes down to that. When he was playing against the Houston Texans, looked terrific in the second half. I mean, the first half wasn't necessarily the greatest. I think it was 10-10 to break, but he comes out in the second 30 minutes and they light the world on fire. Now you need that in the big moments as well. And I think he can be the guy to do that. Whether he wins the Super Bowl or not is entirely out of his hands too. I mean, like you said, maybe the defense is brutal. Let's think of the Ravens back in 2000 through 2002. I mean, that defense was elite. It was as good as it gets. And if you have that type of defense, maybe it doesn't matter if Lamar Jackson plays a full 60 minutes. But on the flip side, the defense isn't as good. It's going to be more on his shoulders. So I think it's a tough question. I could see him doing it. I just don't think it's a guarantee with how much young, good quarterback talent is in the AFC.
And also, you talk about Lamar Jackson was healthy all season for I feel like the first time in his career. So that was a kind of another thing you thought, oh, maybe that's a break in your way, but unfortunately, they can't get it done against the Chiefs. And this also might be a biased take, Luke. I think Lamar Jackson, at least in terms of accomplishments, is officially the second best quarterback in the NFL. You talk about, of course, Patrick Mahomes. He may be the potential GOAT, as we'll talk about later. He's clearly number one. He's shown that again this postseason, having gone on the road finally and winning a few playoff games, getting back to the Super Bowl. But I think Lamar Jackson, likely a two-time MVP. When he plays, I mean, winning percentage-wise, he's right up there in terms of the Ravens winning a lot of games. That's why they gave him the mega contract during the offseason. Obviously, you got other guys. Joe Burrow's made a Super Bowl. Josh Allen's been in the playoffs consistently. But I think when you look at accomplishments, Lamar Jackson is officially the second best quarterback in the game. And that's why I think going into next season, he probably has the most pressure of any quarterback because he's about to win 2 MVPs. What do you think about that?
I think it's a reasonable take, the amount of pressure that's going to be on him. I mean, you get paid the big superstar dollars, you have to deliver like the big superstars. And I think that's not to say that he can't and he hasn't, but he certainly will need to when it comes to winning those type of clutch situations. Now, is he the second best quarterback? I think he could be. It just depends. I think Mahomes, like you mentioned, has got to be number one right now. I mean, he's undefeated in road playoff games, even though it's been a couple of them, and he continues to put in impressive numbers and impressive performances each and every time he's out there. Now he does have two MVPs, but there's other quarterbacks as well. Assuming he wins the second one, which it looks like he will. There's other quarterbacks that are also excellent, like you mentioned. I mean, is Josh Allen in that conversation? Is Joe Burrow when he's fully healthy? I've never been truly aboard the Brock Purdy train just yet. I think he has a terrific team, but he's still a really good quarterback as well. Second best is tough. It almost depends on the week. Is it Lamar Jackson's week? Is it Josh Allen? Sometimes Trevor Lawrence and C.J. Stroud. They look terrific, but are they the second best? I don't know. And I think it's so interesting that it's Mahomes in the field at this point, and it really can just shuffle on a week by week basis.
I was looking at this list earlier too, Luke. This is the list of quarterbacks who have won 2 MVPs: Peyton Manning, Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, Brett Favre, Johnny Unitas, Patrick Mahomes, Joe Montana, Kurt Warner, Steve Young. What do they all have in common? They all won at least one Super Bowl. And they all at least made a Super Bowl. So I think the pressure is certainly going to stack up to Lamar if he wins the MVP, as we're expecting here in the next week. So good discussion there on the Ravens Chiefs. We'll get back to Mahomes and the Chiefs as we preview the Super Bowl. I do want to ask you before we move on. I've talked so much about being a Ravens fan and Lamar fan. What are your favorite teams?
Man, football, Indianapolis Colts. I mean, just a pretty decent year when it comes down to it relative to expectations. You start the year with Richardson, really high on Richardson. I think if he can put it all together, you want to have that type of Lamar Jackson career. And he flashed a lot of that dual threat ability, was great with the legs. He had the season-ending surgery, and that certainly knocked him out. But I think the Colts can get that good nucleus going. They'll have a decent draft pick this year. Receivers an area of need, perhaps tight end. You see some of these guys maybe secondary or D line. But I think the Colts really over exceeded expectations this year, and they can keep doing that. So, we'll root for the Colts. We'll keep hoping that they can put it together. But it's been a tough road since old Andrew Luck has retired.
For sure, we'll certainly see what happens with the Colts there. Let's now move on, Luke, to the NFC Championship game. The 49ers defeating the Lions 34-31. The Lions at one point were up 24-7 in that game in the second half, and you thought, man, maybe the Lions are going to get to the Super Bowl for the first time ever. It's been so fun watching them play in Detroit the first two playoff games against the Rams and the Bucks. But unfortunately for the Lions, the Niners come back and end up winning the game. Brandon Ayuk makes that incredible catch off of a defender's helmet, and it feels like that kind of started to spur things, and CMC's doing his thing, scoring touchdowns almost at will. I guess the biggest question now, Luke, obviously with the Niners winning, as of course you can give your overall take on the game, but has Brock Purdy officially silenced the haters? I mean, now he's got back-to-back playoff wins against the Packers and the Lions, games in which for large stretches he did not play particularly well, but here he is having the Niners back in the Super Bowl.
You never truly silence the haters, and I think there's some for every quarterback. I'm sure Mahomes has some. During his playing days, Tom Brady, I'm sure had some. It was the same with Peyton Manning. Those guys you rattled off, they've had the haters. It's hard to really always silence them. Now, has Brock Purdy proven that he can win a football game when the game is on the line and it's a big situation like the NFC Championship game? Absolutely. And I think he went out and proved it with his legs and with his arm. And if you say, okay, we need to go back and reevaluate our team, let's say the 49ers lose the Super Bowl. They go back and they look at the tape and they say, okay, depending on how Purdy played, we know how he played in the NFC Championship game and threw the way. If he can continue to do that, he's going to be our guy. So I think it's tough to say you truly silence the doubters, but I think he really gave a great performance. And the way you look at him moving forward, you can say, okay, he could be the guy that gets us there.
And I talked about it. The Lions were up 24-7. I guess my question with that is, Luke, did Dan Campbell's coaching cost the Lions the game? I mean, I was thinking about it. I mean, even going back to the controversial Cowboys regular season game that ended with the 2-point conversion that was nullified by the refs. I've kind of felt like sometimes in these situations, he almost coaches like it's Madden. For example, in that game, you get that penalty, you move them back to the 6-yard line. I think at that point, man, you kick the extra point. You were outplaying the Cowboys in the second half. You take your chances in overtime, but they actually did get another penalty that moved him back up to the 2, but I just think at that point, he should have kicked the extra point. Instead, he goes for the 2 at the 6. They end up not converting, and he goes for the 2-point at the 2-yard line. He ended up not converting to lose the game. And in this game, you had a couple of situations. I think they were up 3 possessions, or rather, maybe like 10 points or something like that in the second half. I feel like they kicked a field goal. They would have, of course, increased their chances, maybe put it to a 3-possession game. And then there was another situation where they had a chance to tie the game when the Niners had come all the way back, and they end up missing the game. Now, to be fair to him, we've seen a couple games in these playoffs where the kickers have cost their teams the game, most notably the Packers and the Bills. But I just feel like, sometimes I feel like these coaches now with analytics, they get too kind of in their own way of thinking where it's like, look, man, just take the 3 points. I know that Dan, he's Motor City Dan Campbell. He's been, he's been known to be aggressive this season, but I just feel like sometimes, man, you just take the 3 points. You got to coach differently in the playoffs. This is a chance to go to the Super Bowl. Lions have never been to the Super Bowl. So I feel like I haven't seen that worse of a coaching job since Pete Carroll didn't give the ball to Marshawn Lynch at the one of that Super Bowl. What do you think about that? Do you think Dan Campbell cost the Lions the game?
I think if you have an aggressive philosophy, you stick with it throughout your entirety of the season and in the playoffs. I understand your rationale for doing so. So I have to give him credit in the sense that he had a game plan that he's implemented from day one of the season and he stuck with it. Now, in that situation, I believe there was an instance in the second half where they could have kicked the field goal opportunity and it would have made it the game. I couldn't remember if it was 17 or 20-point lead if they would have hit the field goal. And, relatively makeable. It would have been somewhere in the 40s, 40-yard range. You make that field goal, I think it makes a big difference. So to me, that stands out as one of those plays where, okay, here's an opportunity to make it even a 3-possession game, extend the lead even more. You have a chance to really drive the dagger in the Niners, and you don't want to give them life. It's really all about avoiding those turnovers and giving good field position. I respect Campbell a lot for sticking to his guns, doing what got him there. I think in that situation, they'll kick in the field goal would have been the right play, and I think it ended up hurting him.
And I was curious because he made these comments after the game that, man, it's going to be tougher next year. The Lions are not going to be surprising anybody anymore. People are going to be out for him. And I guess, do you think he should have made that comment? I mean, look, I mean, he's probably, I mean, he's right in terms of literally, but I don't know if he, really should make that comment about, hey, guys, it may not be as easy, and at least out in public, it may not be as easy to get back to the where we were this season, at least the NFC Championship game. And then I guess part 2 to that, Luke, is do you think this was lightning in the bottle this season? Because to me, I kind of feel like it was in the sense that the Packers, Jordan Love showed he is the next, potentially great quarterback for the Packers. It seems like they never have a bad quarterback. They've had 30 years of Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers, and now potentially Jordan Love. He was spectacular in these playoffs. You've got the Bears. The Bears, look, for how bad they were at points in this season, they still won 7 games, and you never know. They've got the number 1 overall pick. Maybe they, draft Caleb Williams. He ends up being a star, or they trade the pick, get some assets, really fix the team around them. Again, they were pretty bad at times and had 7 wins still, so they're not going to be an easy out. And then the Vikings, I mean, I really think the Vikings may have won the division if you have Kirk Cousins and Justin Jefferson healthy the whole season. We'll see if Kirk comes back, but if he does, they certainly can't be dismissed as well. So I personally think that this was kind of lightning in the bottle. It may not be a guarantee that the Lions will be as good and can make it back to the NFC Championship game next year.
I just think it just depends. I mean, the first part of the question, Dan Campbell seems like a really honest guy. He's not going to cut you what you want to hear. He's going to tell you exactly what he thinks. And I think his rationale, I'm sure emotions were running high, that it's going to be really challenging to get back to the NFC Championship game. I mean, Detroit hadn't done it in over half a century, and it had been so long. And I think the exception of the Mahomes and the Brady's and the occasional Peyton Mannings and even Wilsons and Roethlisbergers of the world, it's really challenging to get to those championship games in your conference. I mean, it's just really tough. So I don't think it's an inappropriate comment per se. I think it's a brutally honest one. And maybe he thinks, looking at the roster, well, we got a lot of influx. We're going to have to see how we do in the draft. Are we going to be able to repeat this? I mean, harken back to that Rams game. With the exception of a couple of plays, the Rams were right there and had a chance to win, and the margin between winning and losing is so fine, especially at these professional levels. It's such a challenge to get back to these places. Now, the difference makers, the Mahomes of the world, the Kelseys, the Lamar Jacksons, often, that can be something that separates you, but it's tough. So I totally understand. And whether it's lightning in the bottle, I mean, we'll have to see. I think this Detroit team did overperform expectations. I think they're preseason win total was something like 9 or 10. So when you go over that, I mean, it's great. And I think the city of Detroit has a lot of fantastic things and warm memories. Are they going to be able to repeat it? I mean, it's going to be really challenging. Like you mentioned, I mean, the Packers made the playoffs. They won a playoff game. They were life and death with beating the Niners in that contest as well. Who knows what's going to happen with Minnesota, but they're a well-coached team. I mean, Jefferson isn't going anywhere. You'll have to see if Cousins comes back. And the Bears can retool too. I mean, rebuilds in the NFL can happen quickly. So it wouldn't surprise me if Chicago and those type of teams are nipping at the heels.
I'm curious, between the Ravens and the Lions, who do you think has a better chance of making the AFC Championship game and potentially the Super Bowl next season? If you had to pick between one of the runner-ups, third, fourth place, I'm going to go with the Ravens. I know the AFC is stacked. Again, I know it's a biased pick, but I just think structurally they have the better organization, better team around Lamar Jackson. I think Lamar Jackson is clearly, of course, better than Jared Goff. Their style of play, if they can stick with the run and not abandon it during the AFC Championship game when that's gotten you all the way to there during the regular season. I just think John Harbaugh, he's a Hall of Fame coach. I like the Ravens structurally. They lost Mike McDonald as he became the head coach of the Seattle Seahawks, but they promoted internally. Zachary Orr is now the defense coordinator, former Ravens linebacker. So I still think, even with the stacked AFC, all the great young quarterbacks, I would pick the Ravens over the Lions to at least make it back to the AFC title game next season. What do you think about that?
That's tough. I mean, it's a hard question and it's going to require some thinking. I think I'd have to go with Baltimore as well. Although the only thing that worries me is that division they play in is a really tough division. And Joe Burrow's going to be back. I know Jake Browning had a good year filling in, in pretty quick duty. But I think it's going to be really tough. I mean, the Steelers have never had a losing season under Mike Tomlin. That's something that gets brought up all the time. I think the Browns, if you have Watson back, maybe that makes a difference as well. Or you roll out Flacco in that event as well. I think it's going to be challenging. I will go with the Ravens because I think they're just the better team, and I think they're a very well-run organization. And I think the Lions overperformed a little bit, but that's a tough one. It's no guarantee that either of them is able to replicate the success.
Well, let's get right to it, Luke. We're nearly 20 minutes into the podcast, and we're finally talking about Super Bowl 57 in Las Vegas, Nevada. The Chiefs and the 49ers, a rematch of the 2019 Super Bowl, Super Bowl 54, when the Chiefs won 31-20. Appears to be it's going to be a great game. The Niners, of course, they've been among the league favorites all year to win the Super Bowl, and the Chiefs, the defending champions, of course, they were, I think, at points in the year maybe not taken as seriously. Their stock kind of fell, but they've bounced back and been able to make it back to the Super Bowl. A couple interesting facts about this upcoming game. It's the first Super Bowl played in Nevada, so that's pretty interesting there. It's also the first Super Bowl since Super Bowl 55 to have a defending champion playing in the game. That game also mentioned the Chiefs, as I just mentioned. For the Chiefs, it is the sixth Super Bowl appearance for the franchise, the fourth in the last 5 seasons. They're trying to become the first repeat champion since the 03-04 Patriots, so it shows you how difficult it is to repeat in the NFL. For the 49ers, it's their eighth Super Bowl appearance. They're trying to become the third team to win 6 Super Bowls, joining the Patriots and the Steelers, but they haven't won since 1995. They've actually lost their last 2 Super Bowls to the Ravens and the Chiefs. And this is also the third straight Super Bowl that The game has been played in the Western USA following LA and Glendale. So those are some kind of interesting facts there, Luke, as you think about this game. I think I saw last that the Niners were favored like -1.5, -2.5, somewhere in there. So Niners are slight favorites going into the game, but overall, what are your first impressions of the Super Bowl?
It's tough, and I think points are going to be at a premium in this game. I really see the Niners offense and Chiefs offense as two of the best units in the NFL, but I think these defenses are really unheralded. I mean, the Niners have a who's who and their defensive line in the secondary. They've got a lot of great players. They made deals at the deadline. This Niners defense is really good. And then the Chiefs defense as well. I think a lot of people, you get lost into the headlines of Mahomes and the Kelsey and Isaiah Pacheco and all these guys who can really make some noise on the offensive side. Gets lost in the sauce is the fact that this Kansas City team and this defense is actually really good. I mean, think about the performances they've put up in the playoffs. They've looked really strong. And especially in the second half, they continue to turn it on. So it wouldn't surprise me if points are at a premium this game. I kind of lean towards San Francisco winning right now. Not totally sure. I'm waffling on who I think is going to win, but I would lean San Francisco, and I don't think there's going to be a lot of points. It wouldn't surprise me if this is a 21-17 final, something like that.
Yeah, and the Chiefs have beaten three really good quarterbacks to get to this point: Tua Tagovailoa, Josh Allen, and Lamar Jackson. Now they're facing Brock Purdy, so they've been tested here in the playoffs. The Niners have had a couple of close wins against the Packers and the Lions, so they're also coming in with the chip on their shoulder. I wanted to go to the Niners first, Luke. How much pressure is on the franchise to win the Super Bowl? And you think about it, I mean, a lot of different guys have pressure. You've got Brock Purdy. I mean, here's a guy that if he doesn't win it, they're going to say, well, you basically did what Jimmy G did. You got the Niners to a Super Bowl and you couldn't get him over the top. You look at Kyle Shanahan. He's, I think, unanimously been one of the top, 2, 3 coaches in the NFL, but he hasn't had a ring. And so, people might say, hey, look, I mean, he's this great coach and great schemer, but when he gets to the big game, he can't get it done. I kind of feel like, Luke, that the Niners could become the 90s Bills when you think about it. I mean, a team that, is right there getting to NFC Championship games, Super Bowls, but they haven't been able to get it done if they don't win this game. So, what do you think? How much pressure do you think is on San Francisco to win this game?
There's pressure on any one of these organizations that makes it far, and I think the Niners are no exception. The good thing that they have going for them is a long history, as you detailed, of success in the past, and I think that's still something that can continue to bolster a reputation like the one the Niners have. Now, there's going to be pressure. I mean, absolutely. Is there an extreme amount of pressure, similar to maybe Detroit, where you don't know if they're going to get back, and this is the first time for pretty much everything for them? I think it's less than that, but I think there is a lot on the line. I mean, you have Purdy, you need him to try and go out and perform. Like you mentioned, it's a good comp with Garoppolo. How different are they? If Purdy wins a Super Bowl, all those questions are answered. He's very different. He wins the Super Bowl. That's a big thing. And I think the same thing can be said about Shanahan. You want to have a Super Bowl, whether even if it's just one. If Shanahan were to retire afterwards, that's more than almost every coach can say. And I think it goes a long way. So there's just a lot on the line. And, that's not an outlandish statement, of course, but there's a lot for this Niners team.
And I'm curious, how much do you think is on Mahomes? Look, I mean, he's already won 2 Super Bowls, so if he doesn't win, no one's gonna say, "Oh man, he can't get it done." Obviously, but I just think in terms of the GOAT conversation, obviously he's already been compared to Tom Brady. But I think if he can win a third Super Bowl, all of a sudden you say, "Look, this guy's made 4 out of 5 Super Bowls in the last 5 seasons. He's won 3." All of a sudden, you might think, "Oh wait, maybe this record of 7 Super Bowls may be catchable by that Brady has. That may be catchable by Mahomes." So. What do you think about that? I actually think, Luke, that Mahomes is already the GOAT, personally, because Brady is the LOAT. He is not the GOAT, the luckiest of all time, the LOAT. Because I just look at it, he's the most accomplished. You got to give him credit. 7 Super Bowls, and he played into his 40s. But you think about it, Deflategate, Spygate, the Tuck Rule, those impacted his ability to win big games. The worst call in history, I mean, we all agree Pete Carroll should have given Marshawn Lynch the ball at the 1 yard line. Seahawks win that Super Bowl. Brady would have lost his third straight Super Bowl at that point. The all-time worst choke by the Falcons, up 28-3. I mean, I'm sorry, you got to get it done when you're up 28-3 in the second half of the Super Bowl. Offsides call on D Ford. I mean, we remember that AFC Championship game. Mahomes may have made it in his first year starting if D Ford isn't called for offsides. You look at it also when Brady, I think this is actually a big thing, Luke, that no one talks about, these next 2 points. When Brady was playing for the majority of his career, the 2 seeds also got the first round bye. So, I mean, automatically that's just one game less that you had to play in order to, you only have to win 2 games at that point to make the Super Bowl. So now that, they've changed it to where only the 1 seed gets the bye, I just think at that point, the 2 seeds that did play a role in having an easier path to the Super Bowl. And then also an all-time worst division. I mean, there were really no other decent quarterbacks for the majority of Brady's career when he was in the AFC East. And it's funny, as soon as he gets out, Josh Allen comes, Tua Tagovailoa comes, and all these other guys. So I just think that look, you got to give Brady credit. He is the most accomplished, but I don't think he's the GOAT. He is the luckiest of all time. And I just think you look at Mahomes. I mean, he's from a talent perspective, I think him and Aaron Rodgers are the two most talented quarterbacks I've seen. And from a mobility perspective, it's not even close. He has an element with his legs that Brady could never bring. So I personally think Mahomes is already the GOAT. What do you say about all that?
I mean, Mahomes is certainly in the conversation to catch that many Super Bowls. I don't think there's a doubt. I mean, if he continues on this trajectory, now part of it's going to come down to, I mean, think down the road. Like, you can't capture your eighth Super Bowl in 1 year. You're going to need to continue to win and win consistently. Now, what goes into that? It goes into a winning organization, a stable organization, and an organization that knows what they're doing. And Andy Reid, he may not be around forever. Maybe he wants to hang it up in a couple of years. Maybe they win this Super Bowl and they win another one in 2 or 3 years, and Andy Reid says, that's enough. I'm ready to go. I'm that's enough for me for a career. And Travis Kelce's the same way. He's not going to play football forever. And what do you do when you take some of those weapons away? Well, then you need to have another head coach who's going to be excellent. You need to have another go-to offensive weapon, whether it's tight end, receiver, dynamic running back, akin to Pacheco or some of the Chiefs running backs in the past, Priest Holmes or Larry Johnson, some of those guys. And so it is possible, I think, but it's going to require a lot of organizational structure. It's going to take consistency, and it's going to take a little bit of luck as well. I mean, I know you mentioned the thing with Brady. Has he been overly lucky? Perhaps so. I mean, there's been times. The GOAT, it just depends. I mean, they're very different quarterbacks in the sense that Brady could sit back in the pocket. If you gave him more than 2 or 3 seconds, he's going to dissect you. Even if it's just for 7 yards, he's going to pick up 7 yards. It's going to be 2nd and 3. He's going to pick up 6 more yards. It's going to be first down. So they were different in that sense. That's not to say he couldn't throw it deep, but Mahomes is just explosive. He has every different arm angle. He can run, like you mentioned. He can throw deep. He can throw intermediate. He can throw short if he has to. And he does it with all misdirection, a little bit of flair. So it's tough. I mean, Mahomes is so talented and gifted, and he has an arm that can throw it 100 yards that I think he's truly fantastic as a quarterback. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how his career unfolds, whether it's just the Super Bowls he has now or, 8 more.
So what do you think, though? I mean, if you had to pick one right now as the GOAT, are you sticking with Brady? Do you think you've seen enough from Mahomes? Or are you going with someone else? I mean, I know you're a Colts guy, so maybe Peyton Manning is still your GOAT.
I love Peyton Manning. I mean, a lot of good times with Peyton. I think just today it has to be Brady, but that's not to say that's locked up. I think Mahomes by the end of his career, that could be done. I mean, it's right there for him. You win in a couple Sundays, you're right back in the conversation. Here's the thing: Mahomes is not even 30 years old yet. He is a young guy, and if he plays into 40 years old, I mean, he could have 10 Super Bowls. Who knows? It's one of those things where it's just going to be fun to watch it unfold. And it's tough to say that he's going to have 10. It's tough to say he's going to have more than the couple he has now. So I don't really know. I think I'd have to give it to the known quantity at this moment, just because that's, Brady's career, at least unless he really dusts it off and gets back out there, has come to a close.
But I guess what the last part of that question is, do you think Mahomes has to win 8? Because some people will say, well, Brady has 7, and then he also beat you at 42 or whatever he was to win his 7. So Mahomes has to win 8. Do you think he has to win 8 to surpass Brady, or do you think continues to put up the numbers? Maybe he gets to 4 or 5 even. That's enough to put him in the GOAT conversation.
I don't think you have to have 8. I think it really just depends. I mean, a lot of it will come down to the counting numbers, as fair or unfair as it is. And part of it will come down to just the legacy portion. How many Super Bowls does he get to? Does he win 4, but does he lose 6, in the grand scheme of something like that? Or does he miss the playoffs in 3 straight years? There's a lot of different factors that go into it. I don't think he needs to get 8 to get there, but I think, that would cement it certainly for sure. But no, he could get a handful more or just 1 or 2 more. And I think it's right in discussion.
And Luke, here's another point talking about Andy Reid that I made in my fantasy football group chat. We talk football, of course, all year. I made the point that I believe Andy Reid is already the greatest coach of all time. And let me explain. He might have 3 Super Bowls, depending on how this next one goes here next Sunday. His coaching tree is way better than Bill Belichick's. He's got Super Bowl champions in John Harbaugh and Doug Peterson. Ron Rivera, another coach, made a Super Bowl. We've seen Sean McDermott with the Bills. He's been a pretty good coach during his tenure in Buffalo. We don't even have to talk about how bad Bills guys have been. I mean, Matt Patricia, Josh McDaniels, the list goes on and on. So Andy Reid's coaching tree, it's not even close, is better than Bill Belichick's. You've got Belichick for the most part, and to be fair, I don't think it's all on him. But for the most part, he has not done well without Tom Brady. Now, granted, you could say Bill Belichick's defense won a couple of those Super Bowls. It wasn't Tom Brady's offense. So I think, yeah, you can't give 100% of the credit to Tom Brady, but the record's in the pudding. When he hasn't had Brady, he has not been a good coach record-wise. And people will say, look, Andy Reid only started winning Super Bowls when Patrick Mahomes came around, and that's true and that's fair. But he made 5 NFC title games with the Eagles and a Super Bowl appearance with a guy named Donovan McNabb. And he consistently made the playoffs with Alex Smith as a quarterback in the pre-Patrick Mahomes Chiefs era. Like I just talked about, Belichick really hasn't been able to do anything in his career without Tom Brady. But Andy Reid's doing it with Donovan McNabb. He's winning a lot of games with Alex Smith. So I think bottom line, Andy Reid is officially the GOAT. What do you say about all that?
I think it's tough. I mean, again, it's hard to say. And I mean, you got to throw in some other guys too. You think of Don Shula, you think of some of these guys from the past that are terrific coaches as well. I mean, guys that went undefeated or something like that. I think, again, it's an incomplete resume for Andy Reid and to an extent, Bill Belichick. Now, it doesn't look like Belichick is going to coach anywhere this year. I mean, it certainly points to that, unless there is some move at the nth hour, the last possible second, where he gets a head coaching job. It looks like he's probably going to be on at home for this year. Now, for Andy Reid, does winning a couple more Super Bowls hurt? No, certainly doesn't. I don't think you can measure all of coaching in Super Bowls. Now, when it comes down to wins and stuff like that, Andy Reid, he'll need a little bit more. But again, I think it's an incomplete thing. But I think Reid's right in that conversation. Is Belichick even the greatest? I don't know. Is Shula the greatest? I don't know. Some of these other guys have a stake to it as well. It's really challenging.
I'm curious. So, who do you think is going to be the X factor in this game? I mean, obviously, this game has a lot of big names, big stars: Travis Kelsey, CMC, Debo Samuel, Chris Jones defensively, Nick Bosa defensively, George Kittle, another great tight end. You got a great matchup there with the two tight ends. But a lot of names in this Super Bowl, Luke, that'll be fun to watch. But who do you think is going to be an X factor potentially for each side?
Some of the unheralded guys, when I thought of this, Kansas City, George Karlaftis. I think of a guy on the defensive line. You got a lot of attention on Jones. Karlaftis has been quietly pretty good. He recovered a fumble in their last game. He's kind of been, unheralded on that line because Jones gets so much attention. But Karlaftis had a great year when it came to quarterback pressures. He's consistent in his run coverage, and he's very athletic, too. I think there's a good chance that he makes his mark on this game for Kansas City. And I think if he gets going, it'll even open things up for guys like Chris Jones or guys in the secondary as well. So I think he'll be a big X factor in this contest as well. And I'm going to go special teams for San Francisco. I'm going to go Jake Moody in this contest, their kicker, because I think as a rookie kicker, this is a big opportunity for him. It's going to be really challenging. Does he have the mettle to go in there? Remember, they don't have Robbie Gould anymore. They thought Jake Moody's going to be the guy. Can he go in and nail some field goals when they really need it most? I mean, it's a really thankless position. Think of like Harrison Butker. He's made Super Bowl winning kicks like he did last year against Philadelphia, even though it was a 25, 30-yard field goal kick. Can Jake Moody do the same? Can he do what's asked of him? When you get these 35, 40-yarders, can you put those through for 3 points? When it comes to those 55-yarders, those are tough, and no one's going to hold those against you if you can't hit a 60-yarder in the Super Bowl. That'd be the longest Super Bowl kick in history. So it's not going to be anything like that. But can you go out and do what's asked of you? Make your point afters, make your 35-yarders, make your 40-yarders, and do what you need.
Yeah, especially Jake Moody got drafted in the third round. So I mean, look, you never see kickers go that high. So he's gotta get it done if he gets put in the situation. I'm gonna go with the chalk names. Travis Kelsey on the Chiefs. I mean, again, we talked about it. How the Chiefs have had the most receiver drops in the NFL this year. People have been joking. It's actually been helpful for the Chiefs that Kadarius Toney's been inactive the last couple of games because he's was the league leader in drops, and so that's actually tough for the opposition. But look at last game against Baltimore for Kelsey, 11 receptions, 116 yards, and a touchdown. I just think that, Mahomes is going to have to go to him. We've seen all the records being broken. Joe Montana, Jerry Rice, broken by these two. So, I mean, Kelsey's going to be his bread and butter. He's going to have a big game for Kansas City to have a chance. On the other side, I'm going to go Debo Samuel. I mean, everyone talks about, Christian McCaffrey, but Debo Samuel, I mean, in terms of just utility player, is probably the second most explosive player on that offense. And so I think if there's a lot of attention on CMC, that might open some opportunities in the running and the passing game for Debo Samuel. So I am going with Debo for the San Fran 49ers and Travis Kelsey for the Chiefs. But I was curious. I know you kind of alluded to it. I'm going to wait to make my official pick before next week. And obviously, you can change your pick as well before the Super Bowl. But 10 days out, you're thinking you're leaning 49ers as of right now?
Yeah, it's close. I'm going to say 49ers as of right now, but when that Super Bowl matchup came out and the Niners won, I was probably thinking Kansas City. So I've kind of switched back to San Francisco. I don't know if I'm going to go one way or the other, but if I had to choose today, it would be the San Francisco 49ers.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, the Niners are a great team. Mahomes has been that guy. He's kind of like the new Brady in the sense that you can't bet against him, and he's proven that in these playoffs. So I think it's going to be a great Super Bowl, regardless. I was curious too. Do you have any favorite Super Bowl traditions? I mean, obviously, I'm sure you're going to be watching it somewhere. I mean, is there something you really enjoy doing? Whether it's a specific food that you like to eat during the game, you really enjoy watching the commercials. I mean, what's kind of a favorite Super Bowl tradition that you have?
I think it's you got to get out there and fry up some meat. I mean, it's going to be ribs this year. I mean, just get those puppies ready. I mean, seasoned, might smoke them, might grill them. I'm not totally sure. But we've had wings in the past. I mean, there's been every meat imaginable. So I'm looking forward to getting a good spread out there, settling in for the game. You know, I like the commercials, they're fun. I like the Super Bowl show. Rihanna was great. Usher should be fantastic. But I'm looking forward to that food. I mean, I'm here for the food. I mean, it's going to be fantastic.
I was curious too. I am looking forward to Usher as well. Do you buy maybe any of these conspiracy theories? Because I think one of the big underrated storylines, maybe not by us, but certainly it's going to be covered by the media and by Swifties, is if Taylor Swift can make the game. Because I believe she has a concert in Tokyo the day before, and they were calculating if she left at a certain time after the concert, she'd be able to make it by 5 p.m. Vegas time. And I mean, people have been, putting out the conspiracy theory. Oh, maybe the Chiefs are in the Super Bowl. NFL might try to get, Taylor Swift rather in the halftime show with Usher. Do you buy any of those conspiracy theories? I think actually, to be honest, it's actually will be kind of interesting to see if she could make it to the game if she's doing a concert in Tokyo the night before.
You know, the people that are much smarter than me are coming up with these decisions for the halftime show and whatnot. I think it'd be really cool if you're CBS to get Taylor Swift in attendance because it would really boost ratings, you know, that type of thing. Whether she's going to come out with Usher, I'm sure Usher wants something to do with that. I don't know if they have any songs together. You know, I'm not that deep in the T Swift catalog, although I do like the classics. You know, who knows? I think it'd be cool to see her out there on the halftime show. You know, it's never bad to get more eyeballs and stuff, but if she can make it, I mean, airfare is a wonderful thing. I'm sure it'll be a private plane, and if she can, she will.
And two things to note before we transition away from the Super Bowl. Of course, we're all excited to see what happens next week. The last time the Chiefs and Niners played, we all remember, was February of 2020, and we all know what happened a month later with the pandemic. So, knock on wood, there are no more pandemics in the future. And then also, not to get political, but the two candidates who were the leading, who ended up being the Democratic and Republican candidates, Biden and Trump, it also looks like that's going to be the case this year. So I just think that cemetery is kind of funny in terms of the symmetry rather, in terms of the although you can't rule that out with how old these guys are, not to get on a political tangent, but 2020 you had the two presidential candidates were the same, Chiefs Niners. 2024 Chiefs Niners, and the two presidential candidates. So I think that's kind of interesting symmetry. I almost said it again for the 2 years, but obviously we're very excited to see what happens in the Super Bowl. Right now, Luke is leaning 49ers. I will reserve my pick for next week, but I think it's going to be a great game regardless. I wanted to talk about some as we transition now to big picture NFL questions, Luke. I think the biggest, probably the biggest news, you just alluded to it a few minutes ago, is that Bill Belichick was not among these seven or whatever, however many teams are hiring among these vacancies that were taken. You look at it, or Mike Vrabel. I mean, I thought Mike Vrabel was a good coaching candidate after he got let go by the Titans. He also wasn't hired, and I think obviously the big question with Belichick is because I don't even know that really outside the Falcons if he was really interviewed by really any other teams. But obviously people look at it. I mean, most people probably say he's the GOAT, but I think a lot of people look at his tenure post Brady in New England, personnel decisions, being the GM hasn't always benefited the team. Now, to be fair, I don't think it's all on Bill Belichick. I think actually, if you take away this year, Luke, you look at the other couple years without Brady, they were basically right there to make the playoffs, or they made the playoffs. I mean, they did make the playoffs one year with Mac Jones, so I don't think it's all on him, but I think that's what the masses say. So, were you surprised Bill Belichick did not get a job, and do you think he ends up coaching again? I'd have to think someone's going to hire him eventually, and he's going to try to catch Don Shula's record. I think he's 15 wins short, but were you surprised at all that Bill Belichick was not one of these coaching hires this offseason?
I was surprised. It was one of those things where you figure this guy with the resume that he had, the Super Bowls he's accumulated, and the wins that he's racked up would be a slam dunk hire somewhere. That just wasn't the case. And maybe it came down to the fact that he was also the GM in New England and he wanted general manager control. Maybe these organizations just felt that they could go in a different direction and be more successful. I don't know. But I was surprised to see him not, patrolling a sideline at some point in his cutoff hoodie and whatnot. That'll be very strange to not see. And I think Gerard Mayo is a great replacement for him, but it will be very strange to see him not on the sideline.
And I wanted to ask you too because I mentioned I mean, like I said, I'm a fair weather Commanders fan because I'm DC sports, first, but I'm also a Ravens fan. Dan Quinn today was announced as the Commanders coach, the former Dallas defensive coordinator. I wanted to get your thoughts on that because me personally, I think it's a terrible hire. I mean, I think now to be fair to the Commanders, they wanted Ben Johnson. He decided to stay with Detroit. I think Mike McDonald, the former Ravens defensive coordinator, was up there. He ends up being the next Seattle coach for the Seahawks. So I don't know, who they interviewed and who may have turned him down. To be fair, but I just feel like, I mean, honestly, I would have rather taken Mike. I think Mike Vrabel's a better coach than Dan Quinn, and I think Bill Belichick. I mean, he's the greatest coach of all time. You new ownership. You're really trying to change the culture of the franchise. Why not give a chance to the guy with the most Super Bowl rings? Dan Quinn. I mean, look, he's he choked with the Seahawks. That Seahawks defense gave up 10 points late to Brady in the Super Bowl, and then he was the head coach of that epic Falcons 28-3 collapse. And the last time we saw Dan Quinn, he gave up 48 points. His defense did to Jordan Love and the Packers. So the last time we saw him, it's not like his defense played the best. So I mean, look, I'm not saying he can't coach. I think he's a good defensive coordinator. But I just think, especially you were just coming off of Ron Rivera, you're coming in with another defensive guy. I guess maybe the only argument I can see is if you're saying, well, it's going to be a rebuild anyway. He's probably not going to last the rebuild. But I just feel like in that situation, I would have rather given it to a young guy like Mike McDonald and Ben Johnson. Really have them take the reins, and then once those guys weren't available, bring in I think better coaches in Bill Belichick or Mike Vrabel. What are your thoughts on the Dan Quinn hire?
I think Dan Quinn, as he showed in Dallas, can be a brilliant coordinator. I mean, there were moments where that Dallas team, especially during the regular season, really was a strong unit and perhaps the strongest in the NFL. And I mean, Micah Parsons was terrific when Diggs, before he was hurt, was great too. They had a really strong defensive line. Is he cut out to be a coach for the Commanders? Washington certainly thinks so. I don't know whether he'll be, the guy that leads them out of the slump that they're currently in, or whether he ends up being, another coach that's just on the list. Now, I had read some of the same things that you had read. They had been looking for, these popular offensive coordinators, these popular candidates to try and run the team. Was Dan Quinn their first option? I don't know. Can he be the guy that turns it around? Perhaps so, but it's going to take a lot of buy-in from not only the players, but also from the other coaches and from the organization from the top down. And that's not an easy thing to do. And so this Washington team is going to need to really buy in for him to be successful.
The only thing I will say, though, is that the NFC since 2005 has not had a repeat division champion. I'm not saying the Commanders are better than the Eagles and the Cowboys, but you never know. I mean, that division has been unpredictable the last 20 years or so years, so we'll see what happens there. Before we fully transition away from the NFL, Luke, I wanted to ask you about two awards that I think really more than any year in recent history have a lot of good candidates, a lot of good competition. I wanted to first ask you about, well, first of all, I wanted to say, I think we both agree, you agree Lamar's probably going to win the MVP if that's your pick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right, Lamar.
And so you look at Coach of the Year. Who do you think should be the Coach of the Year? I mean, obviously, they might differ between who ends up actually winning, but you look at it, Luke, I thought there were a lot of great candidates this year. Kevin Stefanski, the job he did once Deshaun Watson went down and Joe Flacco came in for the Browns, he was great. D'Amico Ryans for the Texans. They were the worst team last year, and they end up getting to the divisional round this year. Your guy with the Colts, Shane Stechlin, he was spectacular with the Colts as well. They I think overperformed expectations. Dan Campbell, I mean, he was great with the Lions, and then of course you got guys like John Harbaugh and Kyle Shanahan who were coached of the two coaches of the best teams in their respective conferences. So who do you think should be Coach of the Year if you look at that very well deserving list?
Ooh, it's a tough one. I would be between Stefanski in Cleveland and D'Amico Ryans in Houston. And if I had to lean, I think I'd have to go with D'Amico Ryans just because Houston ended up taking down Cleveland. And I mean, you went head to head, but they both overcame a lot. And I think Ryans, he was such a great player. Really enjoyed watching him as a player. And then he transitions to a team that he knows very well from his playing days. And man, did he turn it around. I mean, he instituted a better culture. CJ Stroud hit all the right buttons with that. Their defense was good. Will Anderson Jr. was a great pick. I think he did a lot. And for me, he's going to be the winner. I think it's close. I would be okay with Stefanski as well and some of those other names that you named, but I think D'Amico Ryans, I mean, he had a terrific year.
I'm gonna go with Kevin Stefanski. I just think, I mean, look, you had all that drama surrounding the Deshaun Watson trade, fully guaranteed deal. He doesn't end up playing half the season, and then you bring in Joe Flacco off his couch, and he ends up, having kind of a resurgence after a really a dormant period in his career after he won the Super Bowl with the Ravens, and he gets them to the that wild card round against the Texans. And again, that division was tough. I mean, you think about it, every team in the AFC North for the first time it was the first time in the Super Bowl era that every team in one division had a winning record. Even the Bengals with Jake Browning were able to get to a 9-8 record. So I just think you put all those things into consideration. Kevin Stefanski would be my pick, but like you said, D'Amico Ryans, all these guys, I think you can make a legitimate argument for. It's been a great year for coaching. And the other award that I feel like it doesn't usually get this much attention, but it is this year, is the Comeback Player of the Year award. Um, I'm going to give you, I don't know if it's necessarily a hot take, actually, because I think a lot of people agree with this. I don't think DeMar Hamlin should win, even though, he may end up winning it and he would deserve it. But just because I think, look, obviously we know the story. He potentially almost died, last year with that hit. But, I just feel like he didn't play. I mean, he played a couple of snaps, I think, most notably against the Chiefs when they try to put him out there for a fake punt, and that doesn't end up being successful. But I just think it has nothing to do with DeMar Hamlin's comeback from, a grave situation rather, but I just think I'd rather give it to guys who have played, multiple games in the season. So to me, that comes down to Joe Flacco or Baker Mayfield. I may surprise you. I'm going Baker Mayfield. I just think he played the whole season. I mean, you give Joe Flacco credit. He was on the couch with his kids and he ends up taking the Browns to the playoffs. But I just think, Baker, after his time with the Browns, I think a lot of people kind of hated on him for some reason. And, he signed with the Bucks. There weren't a lot of expectations. I have friends that were Bucks fans. They were thinking he may not even finish the season as a starter, and here he is. He ends up taking Tampa to the playoffs, almost beating the Lions and getting to the NFC Championship game. So honestly, I'm going Baker. If you had to, I don't think he's going to win, but he would be my pick to be comeback player of the year. Who do you say wins that award?
That's a reasonable pick too. I mean, there was a lot of talk that Kyle Trask could have been the starter in Tampa Bay, and Mayfield had a great year. This has been something I've thought about, and I just have a hard time separating between DeMar Hamlin, obviously what he did, Joe Flacco, and Baker Mayfield as well. I feel okay with Mayfield. I'd feel okay with Flacco too. I tend to lean those as my top two. Not to shortchange what DeMar Hamlin has gone through and what he's been doing. But for me, it'd be Flacco or Mayfield, and I'm having a tough time because I mean you bring up some good points. I mean what Mayfield has done, and he's battled back from playing on the Browns, the Panthers, and the Rams last year, and now he settles in with Tampa. He wins a playoff game, and that's great stuff. And Flacco, in a very unique way, has gotten there too. So I'm okay with either of those.
A great discussion there on the NFL, and we're all excited to see how the season ends with Super Bowl 57 on February 11th with the Chiefs and the 49ers. A great discussion. Thank you for that, Luke, on the NFL. I did want to ask you because, you mentioned the Colts are your favorite team. Do you have any other favorite teams? Of course, I know you're going to say your Indiana Hoosiers, your alma mater would be in that as well. But who are your other favorite teams, if you have any?
That's right. I mean, you got to throw the Hoosiers in there, Indiana Pacers, the Cincinnati Reds for baseball, and then I work with Washington State, the Cougars, so love the Cougs as well. Those are probably the main teams when I have to come down to it. Those are the teams I follow the most closely, but it's just a lot of fun paying attention to them all.
Do you think Richardson has what it takes? I mean, I know he got hurt early on in the season, but he showed flashes. Do you think he has what it takes to kind of be among this next group of great young quarterbacks? Because, I mean, you look at that division, Luke, it's going to be tough with Trevor Lawrence with the Jags and CJ Stroud coming on in that division. So that's not going to be a cakewalk either. And you never know what the Titans might do if they can, with Will Levis can be the guy. But, I think the Colts are going to need Anthony Richardson to really step up and compete with those guys, even in that division.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I think he can be. I think he certainly can be. Now, he didn't get to play a whole bunch this year because he got hurt, but I think what he showed was flashes of someone who can lead the Colts to the place they want to be. I mean, he had great rushing ability. He had some moments where he was terrifically accurate, and he had some moments where he was a little more erratic. And that's normal with any quarterback that was drafted before he was 21 years old. He went in there with all the raw tools, and they're still trying to harness those. And I'm really optimistic about his progress.
And of course, I talked about it. You're a Hoosiers alum from the great University of Indiana. I'm curious because I know probably people mostly ask you about basketball, and we all know the great tradition Indiana has basketball-wise with Bobby Knight, Isaiah Thomas, Steve Alford, Mike Woodson, all those guys. I think Mike Woodson was a good hire for Indiana to really bring that tradition back from the Bob Knight days. But I'm curious. I wanted to ask you about football because I feel like that's often overlooked. Indiana, of course, is in the Big Ten. We're right in the middle of college football realignment with Michigan, of course, already in the Big Ten, but you got Washington and UCLA and all these other teams coming to the conference. How does Indiana compete with those teams to really make some noise in the Big Ten? Because it's going to be a stacked conference starting next year.
I mean, that's the $1 million question. It's not easy. I mean, it's such a loaded conference. And I think IU is doing great things with Kurt Signetti, their new hire, as the head man. I think he did terrific things with James Madison. I think the Dukes were probably the best program at the FCS ranks for quite some time. They move up to FBS, and really, they going into this year could have been one of the best group of five teams. And then I mean, they weren't eligible for postseason play until there weren't enough 6-6 teams. But I mean, that James Madison team was legitimately good, and so I'm excited that he's bringing some of those JMU guys with him. Bloomington, will really, I think, embrace a lot of what he's about from what I've read and from what I've heard. And so I think he's a great hire, and he's going to be the guy that can bring IU football to that place. But it's not going to be easy. I mean, you add USC and UCLA to the schedule, and Washington, and some of these other Oregon's coming, and you have Ohio State and Michigan already in there, and the Badgers, and it's just a tough road. It's going to be a really brutal conference.
And I know all about Jamie, of course, being from the great state of Virginia. I was curious because my alma mater, Virginia Tech, is known as a football school, but I think most people would say Indiana is a basketball school. Is there a noticeable difference in energy between the football and basketball games, or do you still feel like the passion, the fan base is there for football as well?
There is a difference just from the standpoint that Simon Scott Assembly Hall is probably one of the 10 best environments in college basketball. I think that's fair to say. Football, it just depends. Sometimes they're out in full force and it's a big game and it's like that. They're still looking for that consistent footing that men's basketball has had, and that's not something that's been recent to the last 5 years or so. It's been a thing for quite some time, and that doesn't mean that it won't be that way in the future. I mean, IU football is on the upswing for the moment, but it is tough. It's never easy to try and create a foothold in a really difficult conference like the Big Ten.
And how would you describe Bloomington as a town to someone who's never been there?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think it's an area that really embraces the university, and the university embraces the city as well. And I think people that go to IU and have been to IU, they really are passionate about the cream of crimson. And I think if you go there, it's a beautiful city. I mean, it's very much like a park. It's very wide open. You have the sample gates, you have everything. You have the great restaurants and culture and all that stuff. But the people that are IU people, they're very passionate about it, and that's how I describe the fan base. And sometimes it goes on the edge of maybe a little bit too much, whether it's football or basketball, trying to win all those titles or things like that. But they're very a passionate group. That's how I'd say it.
And who would you say is Indiana's biggest rival? I mean, Kentucky and basketball, I know that's a great historic rivalry, but if you had to pick one or two rivals, is there one that really stands out for IU?
Purdue Boilermakers. I mean, they're the hated rival when it comes to just about anything. And I mean, obviously Kentucky's in there, and they're actually resuming the IU UK basketball series starting, I think, next year or the year following. But Purdue has always been the game you circle on the calendar for the old Oak and Buck in football. They're just a good 40 minutes of tough physical basketball. So it's always been those Boilermakers or those Kentucky Wildcats as well.
And speaking of your other teams, I mean the Pacers, Tyrese Halliburton, they've looked pretty good. They're going to host the All Star game, in fact, here in a couple weeks. And then the Reds, I had a chance to see Ellie De La Cruz play in person a couple times this year when the Reds played the Nationals, and he's a exciting young player. So even for your other teams, it's looking like a bright future for both the Pacers and the Reds.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it hasn't always been this way, so it's really cool that it's on the upswing now. And Halliburton's probably one of the three best, four best, five best, point guards in the league right now. And what he's doing, dealing out the number of assists and triple doubles and all this type of stuff is really electric. And I mean, same with the Reds. They got a lot of good young talent, and an infusion of these young players, I think, could have them set up for the future.
I'm curious too, with Indiana, the great state of Indiana, how does it work usually in terms of sports teams? Because there's not really I mean, the Pacers are there and the Colts, but for example, like baseball, I mean, is it kind of split in terms of who people decide to root for?
Yeah, it just depends. I mean, my father grew up a Reds fan. I grew up a Reds fan. I mean, that's just kind of how it was. I mean, they're the closest geographically, but there's a good number of Cubs fans. You got some White Sox fans mixed in there, and then you got some Cardinals as well. I mean, it tends to be more the National League Central mixed in with some White Sox, but you never know. You got some occasional other fans. I have friends that are Pirates fans and Cardinals fans, like I mentioned. So it just depends.
And to close out the podcast, Luke, you've been so gracious with your time. I wanted to transition to your career, like we talked about it. We were both in the Northwoods League in the summer of 2018. I was with the Lacrosse Loggers. You were with the Mankato Moondogs. We had a lot of great battles between our two teams because both teams were right in the mix for the playoffs and had a good record overall that summer. I'm curious though, how did you end up? Can you take me from that summer in Mankato to where you are now, doing Learfield, producing for Washington State, and then also calling games for High Point? How did you go from Mankato to those two opportunities? And can you also kind of take us through what kind of your day jobs and your main responsibilities?
Yeah, I mean, after that summer in Mankato, a lot of fun with the dogs and everything. I mean, they got a couple guys who made it to the MLB, which is really really cool. Um, After that, went to IU and finished off the undergrad, always key. And then, I mean, after that, spent a couple months applying for jobs, and found my way to Learfield and just started doing Western Kentucky. That was the first school I worked for. It was love working with the tops. I mean, Randy Lee, broadcaster, there's fantastic. And after Western Kentucky, went to further into the company and doing some seasonal production stuff with the schools in the West region, which is Washington State is one of them, Washington, Oregon. We've got Western Kentucky in there as well, Providence, some of these other schools. So doing some of the audio production for that, monitoring traffic, and then studio hosting for the Cougs for Washington State as well, and working with that great property and their great broadcasters and everything like that. So it's been a really fun transition from Indiana to North Carolina. The people I work with are fantastic, not only in this office, but again with Washington State and some of those other schools, and working as a play-by-play broadcaster as well, whether it's at High Point, some of the other schools in the area. Been fortunate to work with a myriad of different schools in North Carolina, as well as some other places. So it's been really fun and it's been really cool, and I think it's continues to surprise every single day, which is great.
Curious too. You've done baseball and you've done basketball. What are the biggest differences in prepping for both those sports?
It's tough. I think baseball is, I've heard someone say once, it's almost like a talk show in a way that has a baseball game going on in the background. I think it's more true than I realize the more and more I think about it, because, you have this game, but there's so much downtime. And that's not to say that it's boring, because they continue to put the pitch clock and all this different stuff in there. I love baseball. But you have a lot of time to talk, and you have time to get into stories and the backgrounds of players. And I think that's some of the best stuff that you can bring into the broadcast, is those moments where there's not as much action. You can bring in a story from either your personal experience or somebody else. So I think you have to have a lot, and you have to have a lot of knowledge about the game and the game of baseball. When it comes to basketball, you have to, it depends on, of course, whether you're calling radio or TV, but on the radio aspect of it, you really have to be quick with it. You have to be ready for the passes, you have to be ready for the shots, and it's just got to be really quick and free flowing, in my opinion. And then on the TV side, you do need to have a lot more background information. You need to say, okay, these players are important for this reason, and this team is going against this team. And from here are some of the storylines. So I think there's a lot more background information that comes into that, but it's really important still to really know the teams that you're going into, who their best players are, what they're going to be about, kind of the offensive sets, things like that. And I think after you get enough practice with it, it just becomes one of those things where it's second nature.
Well, that's great to hear. And to wrap up, I wanted to ask you about, have a chance really to reminisce about that great summer in 2018 in the Northwoods League. I always enjoyed going to Mankato. The hotels were pretty good, and food was good. And I believe that was the first year Mankato had their new stadium, and so it was just kind of an enhanced fan experience, being able to call a game. And I think it was at Franklin Rogers Park, if I remember correctly.
That's it. That's right. Oh yeah.
Yeah, so, well, I mean, what are kind of some of your great memories that stick out in terms of your time in the Northwoods League? I always tell people it's a great developmental league for broadcasters because we're calling 72 games in 78 days. You're on the long bus rides. You get to know the players who are the same age as you. You develop a good relationship with the coaches, and they kind of bring you into your inner circle. You meet fans who are really appreciative of you calling the games and doing the broadcast. So I just think overall, I mean, it's in terms of, I mean, I know the Cape Cod gets all the attention, but I think for broadcasters, the Northwoods League really is the best developmental league to really see what it's like to call games in a minor league type setting.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm with you 100%. I think if you want to go out there and really harness the craft and you want to try and call as many games to get better, I think the Northwoods League is the place to do it. And it was wonderful. I mean, so many good memories being in Mankato. I mean, obviously, those 5 a.m. bus trips to Thunder Bay, Canada and Ontario, those start to wear on you. Those might not be the fondest of memories, but you had a lot of good times. I mean, the players were great. I mean, Jake Shevsky was a mainstay. When I think of the Moondogs, I think of him. You know, he was an MVP in the league. He was an All-Star a couple of times, and he had a great Moondog career. You know, I think of Shev and the great times that he had there. Kyle McDonald was a wonderful player. He could smack the ball 600 feet. It was insane. He got drafted by the Yankees for a time. Garrett Mitchell is on the Brewers now, so which is really, really cool. He was a first-round pick. So, and I buried the lead here. Even Brandon Pfaadt pitched in the World Series for the Diamondbacks last year. And he was on that team as a reliever at the time. And all of a sudden, you know, he's pitching in game 4 or in game 6 or game 3 and game 6 of the World Series. And that was surreal to see, like, hey, like I remember that guy sitting in the back of the bus, you know, throwing 98 miles an hour for an inning at a time, playing at D2 Bellarmine, which was really, really cool. So it was surreal. And there were a lot of great memories and great people in Mankato.
I was curious, did you have a favorite place you like to travel on the road to call a game? I mean, I always thought personally it's biased, but I thought lacrosse in terms of the fan base, even though the press box was small, I thought that was one of the best environments to call a game. I enjoyed going to Mankato because of the new ballpark. St. Cloud was great. Eau Claire, you're in a historic ballpark where Hank Aaron used to play. You feel the history there. I think Thunder Bay, I mean, you're right up on top of the of home plate. I thought it was a great view. You see the lake out there in Canada, so I really felt like for the most part, there were no bad places to go for the most part. I mean, Waterloo is pretty humid, but other than that, press box is huge. The people are great. But I would say for me, St. Cloud and Mankato stand out. Or any of those or any other ones stand out to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're exactly right. There's really no bad spot in the Northwoods League. I mean, I remember, I remember Thunder Bay. We went early in the season, and it was one of those deals where it was like still really cold in Thunder Bay, and so I like had to try and wear a hat over the headset and stuff like that, or under the headset. So that was tough. I remember going, and it was like 40 degrees, and I'm like, this is not my favorite trip, but we're gonna get through it. I mean, lacrosse was fantastic, like you said. They had a great environment. You know, like the fans were into it. I remember those games being really, really good. I think one of those games was really high scoring as well. It was like 10-9 or something like that, you know, really tight ball game. So that was fun. Joe Faber Field to St. Cloud was fantastic as well. There really are so many great places in the Northwoods League, and they've expanded a lot too. You know, I've tried to keep up with it a little bit, but there's places now that, you know, I would have never have gone to, and I think that's pretty cool also.
And do you think too, in terms of, I was going to ask, what were your longest bus rides? I mean, you mentioned Thunder Bay. That's a classic for everybody. For us, I think Bismarck was pretty long, 9 hours, and then even just kind of related to the bus rides, I thought it was always insane. Those two city same day doubleheaders. I mean, I think we were lucky in the sense I think we played Eau Claire, so that was like an hour. It wasn't terrible. But did you kind of have any funny stories with that? And of course, the bus rides I think are a big part of that developmental process.
Yeah, I mean the long one to Bismarck, like you mentioned, I think we did that overnight at one point, and we got back at like 6 in the morning. So like we played the third game or like the sixth game. I think it was games of six. That's a six. Did like the sixth game, and it was over at like 10. And just the bus driver just tanked it through the night, just straight through. We're back at like 6 in the morning, and everybody's super tired. And there's a game like the next day. I mean that was tough. But I mean, just that's part of it. You know, you get used to that, and you really get the grind for the travel.
Luke, this has been such a pleasure getting to catch up with you after a long time. I reached out to you out of the blue, and you were very gracious and being willing to do this with me so late in the evening. I really want to thank you. It's been great catching up, talking NFL, previewing the Super Bowl, having a chance even to reminisce about the Northwoods League. Thanks so much, man. It's been a pleasure, and I really hope we can use this opportunity to keep in touch.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I appreciate it, and thank you for having me. And it's been great catching up with you.
Well, thank you so much to Luke Hallett, the proud alumni rather of Indiana University, current broadcaster for High Point. He also does some seasonal producing for Washington State and Learfield, and for joining me on the latest edition of the Pulse with BP. We talked the Super Bowl and so much more. Enjoy the big game coming up next weekend, folks. We'll see you next time. Thanks again.